Hello, everybody. Welcome to this video, which talks about the analysis of popular culture through the lens of multicultural intersectionality. When people use the term popular culture, they are usually referring to a very specific field of cultural expression, typically one rooted in mainstream North American culture and monopolized by enormous corporations like multinational film, television, and recording studios, online companies like Facebook and Google, and an invisible corporate army of advertisers, product designers, marketing analysts, and entertainment lawyers. Most of what you hear on the radio or see on TV or in your local Cineplex is an expression of this intensely monetized megaculture, what Max Horkheimer and Theodore Adorno called the culture industry. It is an open question as to whether popular culture in this sense reflects the values and attitudes of the mass society that consumes it, or whether songs, movies, and other cultural products produced by this system impose their own agenda on their audiences, as Horkheimer and Adorno argued. The reality of the dynamic is likely very complicated and context specific. On the one hand, media executives are likely to want to promote ideological content that supports the authority of big corporations. On the other hand, media corporations want to make money, and the best way to make money is to give the people what they want. So media companies that identify and promote forms of expression that reflect widespread sentiments in the culture are more likely to sell their products and compete with their competitors economically. The question is whether popular culture works from the top down, from the minds of big corporations to the ears and eyeballs of a passive audience, or whether popular culture works from the bottom up, from the unconscious dreams of the population into the mouthpieces of popular media production. Most likely, there is a blend of both effects on the large scale, where the media produces heavily filtered and censored representations of the popular mood, so that both parties get something they want. How authentically any individual piece of popular culture reflects the public mood likely differs according to media type and context as well. A big Hollywood production that requires investment from dozens of enormous companies may seem less likely to serve as a barometer of public sentiment than a YouTube short that quickly racks up millions of views. But to be sure, the nature of public sentiment is never well defined enough to be able to make any definitive or scientific statement about whether a given media product reflects it or not. And media products themselves are available to an infinite variety of interpretations as to the nature of the sentiments they express. Deliberating between the top-down and bottom-up theories of the relationship between mass media products and the values and belief systems of the people who consume them, one might conclude that the whole system is a closed loop, that the corporations give the people what they want, but that what the people want has been preconditioned by exposure to corporate-friendly media, and that there is no outside of popular culture. That popular culture is so monolithic that it is impossible to get any distanced perspective on it, either as a scholar or as a human being, and that we are existentially and psychologically embedded in a global corporate project of mass mutual indoctrination that no single human being can ever hope to comprehend or escape. Fortunately, we live in a world where popular culture, so defined, is only one of a bustling diversity of human cultures, ways of seeing and being, artistic traditions, and unique constellations of philosophical attitudes that exist alongside North American mainstream popular culture. In the 1960s and 70s, when Marshall McLuhan and Lewis Mumford were writing, there was a widespread attitude among North American writers that the future would be characterized by increasing global homogenization, and that soon the whole Earth would be one shared culture, namely mainstream American culture. This tendency peaks in the 1990s with Francis Fukuyama's theory that the fall of the Berlin Wall marked the end of history, and that the 21st century would simply be a process of everyone in the world becoming more and more westernized until we all share the same values as a collective hive mind culture, leaving behind the messy intercultural squabbles that had been the engine of all previous history. But from our historical perspective, we can see the fallacy and arrogance of this idea. As beautiful as it might be in some abstract way for all human beings to share the same culture, not only does that vision smack of a kind of spiritual colonialism, the desire to erase other cultural perspectives to replace them with shopping mall culture, but it also may express a basic misunderstanding of the nature of human consciousness, which seems innately predispositioned to think of culture as a binary proposition that takes place along the borderlines of us and them. A culture forms not only from the inside out, as an expression of a community's sense of togetherness, but also from the outside in, as an expression of what makes our culture distinct from their culture. The result of this quirk of human consciousness is that cultures are never homogeneous. Even a tightly knit community finds itself inevitably riven by differences. Indeed, the way a community negotiates its differences is through the development and evolution of its culture. This means that any vision of utopia that requires complete standardization of the human race is doomed to failure. It also means that a utopia that celebrates human difference as the source and motivation for human becoming and cultural flourishing is a viable and perhaps essential roadmap to a beautiful future for the human race. It also means that we are not slaves of popular culture, because we always experience popular culture through the lens of the other cultural traditions that we feel an affinity with. These cultures come in many forms, and they all overlap, abut, and challenge one another in various ways that foreground the self-determination of the individuals who serve as the vessels and voices of these cultures. As we know, religious faiths, ethno-national identities, racial and gender affiliations, and other large groups share cultural traditions that comprise the essence of what makes them a cohesive group. Their culture is not just something they do, it is what they are. What makes them a community in the first place is their fluency in the cultural idioms that define their group identity. Cultural communities also form around generational identity, Gen Z or Gen Alpha, regional identities, Northerner or Southerner, and biomedical conditions, people with celiac disease, autism, or cancer, as well as around more ephemeral and voluntarist styles of cultural identification, whether it's Trekkies, people who are really into Star Trek, Swifties, people who are really into Taylor Swift, or furries, people who like to dress up as animals. In many ways, a person's personality, identity, and way of life are largely determined by the different cultural affinities that they live among. And one of the explanations for the beautiful diversity evident among human beings is that everyone has a unique constellation of cultural identities that influences the way they think, feel, and behave. In this way, human beings are deeply connected to one another through the cultures that they share, while at the same time they are individuated as unique selves because of the way they bring different cultures into conversation through the way they merge them into a single human life. These cultures don't just sit passively inside a person, they are living forces that enter into a relationship with one another. My identity as a furry and my identity as a person from Connecticut don't sit quietly side by side. They talk to one another. They might fight with each other. They might borrow elements from one another and shape one another so that the way I am a furry is influenced by my identity as a Connecticutian and vice versa. So that my way of being a furry is different from that of a furry from Massachusetts, and my way of being a Connecticutian is different from that of a Connecticutian who is a Trekkie rather than a furry. Multiply this by the dozens or even hundreds of different identities I might have, and you have a very unique person indeed, such that everyone can be thought of as their own individual microculture. This inner negotiation of people's individual cultural identities parallels what happens in the socio-historical world when cultures interact with one another. The history of human intercultural contact has some notoriously ugly episodes, but it is also important to recognize that intercultural relationships are the background reality of all human history and social organization. Human cultures are always bordering one another, trading with one another, developing mythologies about one another that actually express inner truths about their own cultural mindset, borrowing ideas on art forms from one another, etc. Every culture is actually a collage of different cultures that have influenced it, been absorbed by it, or that it has been absorbed by, or that it has defined itself against. When two cultures interact, people on both sides of the exchange see themselves differently. They are transformed by the encounter, and the meaning of the culture itself is transformed, resulting in new cultures that then go on to transform and be transformed by further encounters. This cultural churn is an inevitable aspect of human reality, and in many ways, it defines our human reality. As a result, there is no reason to either look forward to or to dread the end of history, and the prospect of an all-encompassing corporate mass megatechnic popular culture industry hypnotizing us all into a mirror world of existential slavery is also probably overblown, since the macro culture will always be only one cultural strain among the many other popular cultures that arise spontaneously among human populations. The bustling coexistence of these different cultures within us and around us gives us a stance for relativizing any single one of them, and it certainly provides many possible perspectives from which to critique and analyze mainstream popular culture, as well as any other cultural formation.